You're listening to The First Question with Paul Hendrick, brought to you by Ballistic Sports. Follow Ballistic Sports on Twitter at Ballistic Sports. The state of Indiana has historically been a basketball mecca. It still is, in fact, but where there are Hoosiers, there is hockey as well. Former Maple Leaf Ken Klee's roots are from there, and so too John-Michael Liles. Former Leaf spent 3 seasons in Toronto after a tremendous run in Colorado, a 14-year veteran of the National Hockey League, and a career behind him. John and his family reside in Denver. John, let's go back to your formative years, suburban Indianapolis, Zionsville, and the basketball and football influences were many. How did hockey eventually find itself a priority for you?
You know, for me, I was, I don't know if I was a little different, but I kind of just gravitated toward hockey from an early age. And I played a lot of sports. I played baseball, I played golf, I played soccer. I never actually played organized basketball. My neighbor growing up had a basketball court in his hayloft of his farm. And so we used to go there and play big pickup games up in the hayloft, which was always a blast. But yeah, I never actually played organized basketball, never played organized football. And hockey just kind of spoke to me. And I was fortunate enough to kind of keep making that next step each and every year, and make it to the NHL somehow coming out of Indiana. It's definitely an interesting path, and not a lot of Hoosiers coming out of Indiana playing hockey. But Ken Klee, you mentioned him. I actually skate with him regularly here in Colorado now. He's back out here, and yeah, I mean, there's a few. I think Dale Purinton, I believe, might have been a Hoosier at one point or another. Donald Brashear, I think, was born in Indiana. Yeah, there's a few, maybe 1 or 2 Trottiers. So yeah, it's a small club, I would say, but I'm I'm extremely fortunate to be part of it.
Just curious, Ken Klee's, those 2 carrot top little kids that ran around the room, what are they doing now? Because they're not small.
So I think he had 3 boys. One of them plays at Northern Michigan now, I believe he told me. Another one plays somewhere out east, and I'm not 100% sure. And then his youngest is close to playing junior hockey, but I don't know exactly where. So yeah, it's yeah. Trying to keep track of everybody's kids, let alone my own kids, is tough on a day-to-day basis.
Well, let's go back to when you were a kid. You became quite familiar with Canada, and I'm sure that hockey competition for that travel team around Indiana wasn't what it had to be. So you had to go to the competition, because I don't think the Toronto Marlies and the Red Wings and all of that ilk were coming to Indianapolis. How much time did you spend in Canada as a kid?
We spent quite a bit. The team that I grew up playing on, and I will say I was very fortunate growing up on the team that I did. The parents wanted to play the best competition. I think we were the only AAA team in the state of Indiana at that time, and so we were in the Michigan National Hockey League, and it was CompuWare, and it was Little Caesars, and it was Team Illinois, and any other number of teams depending on a year-to-year basis. But then if there wasn't any games in the Michigan National League, we were going to play, try to play the best competition. And yeah, you're very correct that not many, if any, Canadian teams came down to Indianapolis to play us. So we were consistently traveling up to Toronto and up to Michigan and up to Chicago and just trying to play the best competition. And for me, I'm, like I said, very fortunate to have played on that team, because it kind of sent me on the path that what would lead me to the NHL.
What are your memories of the Quebec Pee Wee Tournament back in 1994? That's a big, prestigious road trip.
Yeah, it was. I remember my mom came up with me. My dad had to work. So yeah, I remember going up with my team. I think I got food poisoning for like 2 straight days at one point during the tournament, which was no fun, but always an interesting memory to look back on. And then I just remember, playing those games and playing in the Colisée and it being, I'm pretty sure it was full. I think I watched a game, the Rangers and the Nordiques at that time. And it's funny because Joe Sakic was my roommate my rookie year in Colorado. And I'm pretty sure I told him I watched you when you played for the Nordiques, and I was 14 playing in the Quebec, or 13 playing in the Quebec tournament. And I don't think he liked that comment too much.
A dose of discipline and structure is always a good thing. Did nearby Culver Military Academy provide that for both you and your brother Joseph?
Yeah, it absolutely did. I loved my time at Culver. I actually had a house there in the off seasons for pretty much the entire time I was playing in the NHL. I would go back there and train between there and Michigan State. And it was a special place. My dad worked there. My brother that went there for 4 years. My brother then went on to the Naval Academy and is still active duty in the Navy and flies in the Navy still, and a much better man than me. But yeah, Culver instilled a lot of great habits and a lot of really good work ethic for me. And something that really rang true to me at that age. I think at 14 and 15 years old, you can maybe tend to go 100 different ways, and with Culver, it gave me something to really focus on, whether it was academics or leadership or hockey, and just a place that I am forever in debt to for what they did for me in those 2 years.
You mentioned your brother, the pilot. If I recall, when you were playing in Toronto, he was in active duty over Iraq, correct? That had to be a worry for all of you.
Yeah, it is, and he's married now. They actually had their first kid a couple of weeks ago, and so yeah, I mean, anytime he would deploy, it was always worrying because you never knew exactly where he was. He couldn't really tell you. Some of the units that he was flying with were somewhat secretive would be an understatement. And so he, we would get our before Zoom calls, our Skype calls. We would get our Skype calls from him, once or twice a week, and usually he'd be sitting in a relatively small room and on some base somewhere, and couldn't really tell us where, but we were always really happy when we heard from him, and just knew that that he was okay, and we always knew that him and his crew were doing everything they could to, one, take care of the U.S., but also to take care of themselves and get back home safely.
I know when you were in Toronto, I think we had Luke's troops and then Loop's troops, but you wore the uniform in school. How did that impact the respect you have for those who have made it an occupation?
Well, absolutely. I have tremendous respect for everyone in the military, and Shenny and Loop and those guys doing what they did for the troops. I mean, with my brother being, who he was, even before that, it always rang true in our family. Both my grandparents served, or both of my grandfathers served. And so, for my brother to be serving, still serving at this time, I mean, it was always something, to me. It was special, and anything I could do to whatever that was, help give back, spend time, whatever that was, I was always, I tried to be as accommodating as possible, and because those men and women give the ultimate sacrifice, and what I do is what I was doing was playing a game, and what they do is put their life on the line each and every day. So to be able to be a part of that and give back and spend time with those great men and women was just a small small consolation from my part.
Where does the predominant athletic gene come from in your family, John? I read somewhere your mom actually wrote at Purdue. Is that true?
Yeah, she did.
Okay.
She doesn't like to talk about it very much. I'm not sure how much she wrote at Purdue, but she did. You know what? I would say it's a pretty good mix. I think, my dad's he was a pretty good athlete growing up, and my mom was also a good athlete. I would say I probably get my competitiveness from my mom, and my fire from my mom, I guess, my unwillingness to quit, if you will. And so I get a lot of that from my mom, but my dad's also a bit of a hard head. So I think it's probably a pretty good mix of athletics and just not really knowing when to give up.
Culver's not far from home, but you really leave home at the age of 16 and head to Ann Arbor in the U.S. Development Program. Combine 2 years at Culver with your 2 years that you spent in Ann Arbor. Was that a crash course in growing up?
It absolutely was. And, coming from Culver and coming from Indiana, I loved my 2 years at Culver. It did so much for me, hockey-wise, leadership-wise, school. but then going to Ann Arbor and all of a sudden you're playing on a team with the best 17 and 18-year-olds in the US. It was definitely a wake-up call, because having been at Culver and being one of the top players on the team, and then going there, and you kind of have to find your way. And I want to say I think we had almost every kid on that program on my team commit to D1 college or played in the OHL, played junior hockey, and a lot of guys went on to pro careers. And so when you walk in and all of a sudden, these are really good friends of yours, but you're also competing for ice time and development and all sorts of different things. It was a bit of a crash course, but man, it to me, it was so special being there the first 2 years that program was in existence. I think we got away with a lot more than the kids there get away with now. But it's something I look back on really fondly, and just wouldn't trade it for anything, because it meant so much to not only my growth as an individual, but my growth as a hockey player as well, and definitely prepared me for going to Michigan State University.
Ron Hainsey was a teammate back then, bright, articulate, a unique way of dealing with the media.
That's the nicest thing I've heard anybody from the media say about Ron.
Was he like that back then?
He was the exact same. It's amazing. He was the exact same person. He doesn't look like he's aged at all since we were playing junior together at 16 years old. But two, he was the exact same. And there wasn't really a media presence, but when you dealt with Ron on a day-to-day basis, you just kind of knew what you were getting. And then when I got traded to Carolina and he was there, I laughed every time I came in the room. Ron and I always got along so well. I liked him as a player, as a person. I always used to give him flack because he was from Connecticut, but he tried to, he was a Yankee fan and tried to act like he was from New York all the time. And I would give him flack and say, what are you talking about? You're from Connecticut. It's not like you're from Manhattan. Like, what are you talking about? And he never loved that, but we got along really well and gave each other a lot of flack. And I was fortunate enough to spend a few years with him in Carolina toward the end of my career, and he was still grinding it out somehow, which is pretty impressive. The guy, he's a freak of nature. He is an absolute freak of nature, but I love it. He's a great guy.
Yeah, I mean, I did a 5-minute interview with him. He didn't answer one question the way it was asked, and his wife's from like nearby. There were so many great stories. The Deans and Hartford and all of it.
He's destined for politics because he won't answer one question straight. he goes off on whatever direction he wants. But if you ask him, is this black or white? He's going to tell you it's gray, and we're going to just run with gray.
Yeah, and if I'm a member of the NHLPA, that's who I want at the table. I mean,
I would be shocked. I would be shocked if he's not in one form or another working with the PA in the next few years.
You're living in Ann Arbor, as I mentioned, a couple of years, Red Berenson's backyard, basically. How in heck did you end up in East Lansing with Yost and the Big House right there as constant reminders of maybe where you could have gone?
Yeah, it was, I don't know. I mean, I had actually had some friends that went to Michigan. Andy Hilbert was on the team with me. He went to Michigan. I spoke with Michigan during the recruiting process, and something about Michigan State spoke to me. I actually had a few friends that played on the Spartans that were a year older than me. And so when I went on my recruiting visit there, I love the campus. I love, the team at the time was really good. And it was just one of those things where I think my parents, Notre Dame was definitely right up there. Dave Poulin was the coach at the time. Still gives me a lot of flack to this day about choosing Michigan State over Notre Dame. And I think my parents were thinking I was going to go to Notre Dame as well, but it was just a little too close to home. So Michigan State was, it really came down to it. It was an easy choice for me at the end. I went back and forth quite a bit, but Michigan State was a really easy choice. And man, I loved my 4 years there. I had a great time. And once again, it prepared me for the next step of playing, professional hockey. And little did I know that it would be, a 14-year career in the NHL.
Not all great teams win championships, John. It's a fine line. How dominant was that 2001 squad that you played on in your third year?
it was a fun team to play on, and the fact that we lost in the Frozen Four in the semifinals was pretty devastating. As devastating as as anything that's happened to me in my hockey career. I mean, I think, just thinking back, I think we had 16 or 17 straight weeks of being number one in the nation. We had a 23 game unbeaten streak. I think we were 19-0-4 at one point over that stretch, and Ryan Miller won the Hobie that year with a 1.2 goals against or 1.3 goals against average. I mean, we just the whole year went our way. I think a lot, on a lot of bounces, and unfortunately, when the time came in the Frozen Four in that semifinal, North Dakota just, I mean, they played a heck of a game. I think they beat us 2-0, and I think that was only our 5th loss of the year. So yeah, definitely disappointing. It was an amazing team. We had a great run that year, and still some of my best friends to this day are from that team.
Such a hard championship to win. Matt Fratton, who went to North Dakota, they get to the Frozen Four in St. Paul and lose to a hot goaltender. It was one of your teammates' brothers at Michigan. Who's the goaltender?
Jeff Lurg.
No.
Right? No?
Anyway, they lost. They got shut out. That North Dakota team got shut out, and that was it. Yeah. They were done.
Yeah, that's the crazy part about the NCAA tournament. It's one and done. And if you don't have your best, I mean, you look at a guy like Cale Makar, who dominated college hockey for so long, for the entire year, won the Hobie, ran away with the Hobie, and then they lose in the final. Yeah. And I mean, it's one and done. And if you're even a little bit off, a lot of times that can just knock you right out. And that's what happened to us. And it happens a lot.
I've got to get that goalie's name. It's going to come to me in a moment, even if I have to look it up. You nearly had a chance of playing 2 of the greatest outdoor games going. We'll talk about the one first that you did get to play in, the Cold War, a Saturday night in East Lansing. The weather is perfect. It wasn't like it was in Ann Arbor when you almost got a chance to play in that game. Number 1 versus number 4. What a game, and especially the way it ended for the home side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was something special, and that was arguably the first outdoor game. It kind of showed what could be done, and some of the things I remember about that game were it was a month after 9/11. And so the emotions were running high. Security was really, really tight. I remember they had talked about doing a flyover. They talked about having helicopters and planes flying around like they did at the football games. And all of a sudden, all that got shut down so quickly because of 9/11. And I remember the emotions that I had during the national anthems of that game. And it was, something that I still remember to this day. And the game itself was amazing. I mean, we tied it. Jim Slater tied it with, I think, with 30 seconds left or something to make it 3-3. And then in overtime, nobody scored. But it was thrilling and really special. And the day before, I think it was 55 or 60 degrees, and it dropped down to 30 or 35 degrees the day of the game. So it was kind of like everything lined up for us to have that game. Yeah, and then the game at the Big House. I think I'm still the only guy to have been traded during a Winter Classic, which is I don't know if that's a good claim to fame or a bad claim to fame. Now that I'm on TV with the Avalanche, the guys that I work with love to bring that up anytime there's a Winter Classic going on. That's a fun stat for everyone but me. But yeah, and to this day, I still don't know where my jersey went. I went out, warmed up, came off, said I was traded, and I still haven't seen my Winter Classic jersey. So I don't know if you got any strings that you can pull, but haven't seen that Winter Classic jersey. But it was, I mean, that was an amazing event as well. And I stood in the in the tunnel and watched the entire game, and then hopped on the equipment truck with the equipment guys and went to the Detroit airport and flew to Washington to meet the Hurricanes. And it's funny, I was at the draft in Vancouver. It was over a year ago now, and Jim Hughes was there, and he was telling me the last time he saw me was in the equipment truck riding with him because he was going to Finland to scout, and I was on my way to meet the Hurricanes there in Washington. So it's kind of funny how that works out. Obviously, he's got 2 amazing young sons in the NHL now, which makes me happy that I'm retired.
Yeah, and their gene pool, they can thank their mom for all of those hockey players and her expertise at Providence. 4 years at MSU, a brief stint with Hershey that spring. What clicked for you in making the Avalanches what was termed an undersized defenseman, and you make it at the age of 21?
You know what? It was, I think, you know, and I've talked about this with a lot of people. When you have a long career or even a career in the NHL, there's a lot that has to go right, and that's, you know, work ethic and, you know, some talent, but also you have to have a lot of luck as well, I think, and take advantage of those opportunities when you have that luck. And for me, coming in and with that team in Colorado, and I played in Hershey, and so I got a taste of pro hockey, and I came in early because I knew some of the guys from Hershey that were in Denver training. And so I think a lot of it, you know, a lot of things lined up for me to make that team. Tony Granato was the coach and wasn't afraid to have a smaller defenseman on the back end. You had some amazing forwards up there. So I think maybe they were looking for, you know, maybe one more puck mover when you have Rob Blake and you have Martin Skula and you have Derek Morris and those guys on the back end. I mean, for me coming in as a young kid, there was so much Adam Foote, guys that I could learn from. And I just tried to absorb as much as I could when I came in for training camp that year. And DJ Smith was actually the sixth defenseman that year. And so when I came in, he was scheduled to be the sixth defenseman, and he got an eye injury in training camp and missed the majority of training camp and was going to miss a good part of the season, I think, or a good early part of the season. And that actually opened the door for me to get a spot. Otherwise, I think I probably would have been back in Hershey, and who knows how it played out. But I was able to take advantage of, I don't want to call it luck when somebody gets injured, but it was an opportunity for me. And I was able to take advantage of that and kind of run with it. And with that team, like I said, I mean, there were so many great players on that team. I mean, our top two lines were, you know, Sakic, Correa, Solani, Forsberg, Hayduk, Tanguay. I mean, it was, you know, I still look back on it to this day. And my dad just kept saying to me, he's like, enjoy every minute of it, try and soak it all in, because it's not always going to be like that. And, you know, you come in as a 21, 22-year-old kid and you're playing on this team and you're rooming with Joe Sakic. There was so much that I look back on and just kind of shake my head and say, was this really real?
I think if Milan Hayduk played in Toronto, Montreal, he might be one of the most underrated superstars. He was just incredible, and Colorado got him for his entire career.
Yeah. And he had the opportunity toward the end when Colorado had some down years to go play elsewhere. And he was never that guy where he was, you know, he had his Stanley Cup and you know, he loved Colorado. He loved raising his kids here, and he just never really wanted an opportunity to go elsewhere. I think I remember Pittsburgh was trying to pick him up at one point, and I think they maybe asked him, you know, Colorado asked him if he would, you know, waive his no move or his no trade. He was as underrated as they come. I mean, you know, I skate with him regularly now. We have an Avalanche alumni skate every 2 weeks, and he skates. And I mean, he still moves like he could play in the NHL on the right team right now. You know, if you just get him on a line with two relatively quick guys that can get him the puck, he goes posting in every time, and it is amazing. Like he's so impressive. His hands are so impressive, and he is fun to watch, and just an overall amazing guy too. Just the nicest person in the world. I don't think he's ever had a bad day in his life.
The best way to cement a friendship is to offer your number, and you're an established National Hockey League player when Paul Stastny arrives from the University of Denver. John, that was a tremendous thing, but I know you and your person, this was just par for the course, but maybe you can elaborate on the entire situation and how important that was to Paul back then.
Yeah, he's he's one of my best friends to this day. It's funny, I've known the Stastny family since since Paul was young, and I was playing on the U.S. program, and one of my good friends there grew up next to the Stastnys, and so I met Jan, his older brother, when Jan was 15 years old or 14 years old, and Paulie was 12, and since then, I mean, we knew each other and we played against each other, but when he came in with Colorado. He made the team, and I was given 26 my first training camp in Colorado. Never thought about changing it. Rob Blake was number 4. I grew up wearing number 4, but I was going to stick with 26. Well, Paul made the team, and Steve Konowalchuk, who was a great leader and a guy that was really in tune with the room and with the players. And he kind of pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about giving Stas your number?" And I was like, "No, why?" He goes, "Well, his dad was a Hall of Famer wearing 26 for the Nordiques." And the minute he said that, it all clicked, because I knew he grew up wearing 26, but the significance, I'm from Indiana, obviously. So, the subtleties of the NHL were kind of lost on me growing up, given that we got Rangers games only, and that was like once every couple of weeks. And so, I just, it clicked, and I just kind of pulled him aside and I said, "Hey, Paulie, would you want to wear 26? And I think we were 9 or 10 games into the year, and he was like, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." I said, "Let me call, Rob Blake." Because Blakey had left the prior year. And so I called Blakey, who was a good friend of mine, my D partner for my first 3 years. And I said, "Hey, Blakey, I grew up, wearing 4. And now that you're gone, do you care if I switch to it?" Stas, I was going to give him 26. And Blakey was like, "Well, you didn't have to call me to ask, but I appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead." And so I switched, switched from 26 to 4, and Stas switched to 26. And I think the first game we were in Montreal, where he was wearing 26, he actually scored his first goal of the year. So I don't want to take credit for it, but I think that had a little to do with it. And, maybe some of the hot dogs in Montreal had something to do with it as well.
And you've got to have a couple of those. Your passions.
Gotta have to.
I know you don't, but they're always in the room. I mean, they
are so good. So good.
Your passions in life include golf and Manchester United football. Refresh my memory of that quick dash across the pond with Paul to see your beloved Man U when they were really good.
When they were really good, when you could count on them winning almost every game. You know what? It was it was 2010 or 2011, somewhere around there, and we decided that we were going to shoot over and catch Man U, and it turned out we were able to schedule Man U at Arsenal. And luck have it, our owner here in Colorado also owns Arsenal, and so he was able to get us some pretty decent seats at the Emirates, which was nice. And Arsenal won 1-0, so that was nice. That was nice for him. He gave us the seats, and karma, he got the win. But then we went up to took the train up to Manchester, and we were able to sit 4th row in the Champions League semifinal of Manchester United and Schalke, and that was just an amazing experience. Those are the best sporting events I've ever been to, and it's not even close, hands down. They are just amazing sporting events. I mean, the athleticism, the fans, the atmosphere, and the pubs afterward. It's a special place.
Yeah, well, it was the off season for you. That's a fact.
Yeah.
Tough market as Toronto can be perceived to be, you embraced it both on the ice and especially philanthropically off the ice. What made your experience in Toronto so unique, John?
Well, you know what? I mean, my wife and I had an amazing experience in Toronto, from the people that we played with to the organization, to the city, the fans. I mean, it was really special. And listen, not everything is a happy ending. And for me, it was tough. My last year there, up and down in the minors was not easy, but I wouldn't trade that for anything. I learned a lot. I think I grew as a person and as a leader. And you know what, coming in and just seeing how much people love Toronto. I think, going in when I got traded, I said, it won't be that big a deal. And then you get up there and you realize how big a deal it really is. And that's definitely an understatement. I mean, people are crazy about the Leafs and they love them. And I mean, I remember walking down the sidewalk and some guy slamming on his brakes in the middle of downtown and was like, "Liles," and he's like, "Yeah, keep going." And I'm like, I'm a nobody on this team. That's Toronto for you. And for me, being a hockey player was not the whole picture. I wanted to try and give back, whether it was in Colorado, whether it was in Toronto, whether it was in Carolina, or whether it was in Boston. And if I had opportunities to give back off the ice, I was gonna do that and try and make the most of not only having a platform, but also helping any way I could, whether that was financially or giving time or any number of ways. And I think Toronto it just, with how big the Maple Leafs are there, it just allows you so many more opportunities. And I was really fortunate to be able to have those opportunities and take part with some amazing people within the organization, as well as, guys that I played on the teams with.
You mentioned, the end wasn't what you wanted to be, but you made the best of it. You get sent down to the Marlies a couple of times. And, I talked to Coach Steve Spott and players who played on that team. You took the high road. You didn't pout. In fact, you took a lot of the younger guys under your wing, whether it had been Texas at that ultra stream coffee shop. There were places, dinners, things like that. You made the best of a tough situation, but you wouldn't have had it any other way.
No, I wouldn't have. And listen, I mean, I could sit here and tell you that the whole time I was, planning on doing it like that. I mean, it's a roller coaster of emotions, especially when you've played. I think at that time, I think I'd played 10 years in the NHL or 9 years in the NHL and had a lot of success and signed an extension in Toronto. And sometimes things change. And Berkey was the guy that signed me the extension, and Ron Wilson was the coach. And then, you have a different GM, you have a different coach. And sometimes that's the way things go. I had my ups and downs, but in the end, my brother-in-law said something that really rang true to me. He said, and he was a professional golfer, and he just said, hey, you have two choices. You can take it as a professional, or you can be an amateur about it. And for me, that rung true. And I said, you know what? No, I'm going to be a professional, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to go down and I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to help out the young guys where I can. Because for me, I came in the league, and I was 21, 22, but there were still guys that were older than me that took great care of me and made sure that I knew the ins and outs of being a professional hockey player, and what not to do, what to do, how to be successful on a daily basis. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And, even toward the end of my career, whether it was in Carolina with some of the young defensemen there, or Boston with some of the young defensemen there, I mean, I was never the same player that I was in my early years in Colorado. I was an offensive defense in my early years. I could skate. I was joining the rush, and as you get older, time takes its toll. And so, I wasn't the Torrey Krug or the Brian Rafalski or the Brian Leach that I modeled my game after. I was a guy that had to think the game and make sure that I was taking care of not only my business, but also being a good teammate in the locker room. And that all started, well, not all started, but a lot of that started with the Marlies. And I got to give a lot of credit too to Steve Spott and Steve Staios and the guys that were involved in the organization at that time. They said, hey, our goal here is to get you back to the NHL, but you're going to have to pull your end of the rope as well. And I was fine with that. And those guys were fantastic. Spotter was an amazing coach, an amazing guy to just go into and just chat about the game, and the guys on that team too. I mean, man, we had a lot of success. And it's funny, they went to the Calder Cup final that year. I think they went to Game 7, and I was texting with Spotter after that game, and he was like, Johnny, we could have used you for Game 7. I said, yeah, Spotter, I appreciate that. And I appreciate everything he did for me, getting me back to the NHL and ultimately getting traded to Carolina.
Yeah, they went to the semifinals in Game 7 and lost to Texas.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
They'd have beaten St. John's. You talk about tough losses, and the one to North Dakota, obviously so tough, because that was a team that was going to win a championship. May 13th, 2013, you're playing for Toronto in that heartbreaking loss, and you assist on a couple of goals. Phil and Nazem score. Leafs are up 4-1, and things are looking good. Now, you, years later, would play for Boston. You've got a perspective of what Patrice and Zdeno and that organization's all about. Were you able now to look back and put it all into perspective, given what Toronto was on the verge of accomplishing, but knowing what they had to do to get out of that building with a win in Game 7?
I will say this. It does give you a completely different perspective having played for Boston and playing with Zdeno Chara and Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand and David Krejci and all these tremendous players that I ended up playing with in Boston. And I mean, there's a reason why they've had the success that they've had. And looking back on it, I'm not going to say it's not a surprise that they came back and beat us in Game 7, because it literally rips your heart out. And I sat there in my equipment for 45 minutes after the game ended. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it multiple times now with some of the heartbreakers that Toronto has had to go through. But I just remember sitting there and you kind of blink and say, did that really just happen? and having played with those guys, I mean, those guys are tremendous players. Patrice Bergeron is, I mean, I told him when I retired after my last game, I said, listen, I don't say this lightly. I played with Joe Sakic, and there's not a lot of guys I compare to Joe Sakic. I said, you would be right up there, not only as a leader, but as a player. And he said, Johnny, that means a lot to me. I grew up idolizing Joe Sakic. And so for you to say that means a lot. And I meant it. I mean, that is a guy that is as good a two-way player, as I've ever played with. I played with Peter Forsberg. I played with, Joe Sakic. I played with a lot of great players, and he is right up there, and a genuinely good human being as well. And then you add in Zdeno Chara, and you add in, the guys that they had on that team, and man, it's never easy to talk about. I've had to do a few interviews about it, and every time I kind of, you get a call, hey, we want to talk about that Game 7 loss to Boston. And it's like, come on, guys, it's 6 years later, or 5 years later. But it is, man, we were really close to doing something special, and especially being down 3-2 in the series and winning, actually, I think we were down 3-1, winning, 2 games in a row, and having them on the verge there in Game 7. Somebody had a breakaway in the third period.
Right.
Man, it's just, yes, exactly. Yeah. And Frats he's an assassin on breakaways too. And so it's like, one of those things where you just, you look at it and it's like, sometimes it's just not your day. And we just, once we were up 4-1 and had that chance, and all of a sudden we don't score there, and they get that 4-2 goal, and all of a sudden you're on the bench going, oh man, these guys, you could tell in the building, you could feel it in the building too. It's one of those things. It was like, you try and do everything you can to stop the train from coming down the tracks, but sometimes that train's just too heavy and coming too fast.
John, in our final moments, I just want to touch on a couple of things. You played a year with Manny Malhotra in Carolina. What will he bring to the Leaf coaching staff?
Manny is a tremendous person, a great family man, very, very smart player. I really enjoyed playing with him. I loved playing with him. I loved talking to him off the ice. Really, really smart. Just a great guy. One of those guys. I played with Dan Heinold and lived with him in Colorado, and a guy that just, they're the heart and soul of your team. The salt of the earth guys, the guys that bring players and teams together, and that's what you need to have successful teams. Dan was one of those guys. Manny was one of those guys. A guy that can bring those top line superstars and those fourth line guys and have them all as equals, and make sure they stay as equals. And he's a guy that can just make sure the room is right. And like I said, a really, really smart individual. I was privileged to play with him, and somebody that I think Toronto will love having in their organization.
Final question. How impactful was Nazem in his first year in Denver, and might a fresh start in Edmonton be good for Tyson Barrie? Because sometimes change is good.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, listen, Naz was fantastic in Colorado, and I saw him prior to the season last year. We live up in the mountains, and so Sidney Crosby holds a camp in the mountains prior to the season, and Naz was here, and I got to talk to him for a while, and I was like, this is an opportunity, right? Like this is going to be really good. I said, listen, just be a great second line center, and you got no worries. Nathan MacKinnon is all world. He's only getting better, and like you'll see that. He told me, he's like, I cannot wait. He goes, he's like, I'm so excited. He loved Toronto, grew up loving the Leafs, loved playing for the Leafs, but yeah, this is a different opportunity for him. And I think he took full advantage of it. It was something that the Avs desperately needed. They needed a second line center badly. They needed, a little bit of jam. They were able to move Landeskog down with Kadri for parts of the season, and that gave them that second line that, they could score, but they could also run you over, and they could drop the gloves if they had to. And that was, that was much needed in Colorado, because they relied solely on Nathan MacKinnon for a long time. And, this was, that was a big trade for them. And, as far as Tice goes, I mean, he's a fantastic kid. I look at, what he went through in Toronto, and, some good, some bad. But what a fresh start for him. He's an amazing player. And I don't think that, we all have off years, and one off year, I don't think is going to define him as a player, because he's tremendously talented. He's very confident, and he can run a power play as well as anybody. And so for him going to Edmonton, I don't see him having anything but success there. And you know what? Sometimes that's the way it works out. I mean, I came to Toronto, and it was amazing for me for my first 25 games. I got a terrible concussion, or 27 games, got a terrible concussion. And then it just never seemed to, the puzzle pieces just never seemed to fit after that. And that's the way it goes sometimes. And not to say that it's, Toronto only. That's just, it happened to be that, I was in Toronto and Tyson was in Toronto. And you know what, I think Tice will have success. I hope that it's not against the Avalanche, but he's a great player and a tremendous puck mover. And I think he'll do just fine.
Before we go, you've got two kids. Things are quiet. Is Manning still around?
He is not.
Oh.
So, when we got traded from Carolina to Boston, we were living in Carolina. We had a house rented down there, and we sent him back with my folks to Indiana, and he passed away about a month later. He just got sick. He was 13, and man, it's funny. My daughter was a year old at the time, and to this day, I don't think she really remembers, but she still says she misses Manning and has a picture of him in her room. But yeah, Manning was a special dog. We will get another dog someday. I just don't think I'm quite ready to take that leap with two kids under 5. So,
John, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was fun.
You've been listening to The First Question with Paul Hendrick. Brought to you by Ballistic Sports. Follow Ballistic Sports on Twitter @Ballistic Sports.